In 1838, a plantation in Georgia was abandoned overnight. Its fields rotted untouched, its house left standing like a mausoleum, its name erased from every map. No fire, no battle, just silence. But deep in the church records of Talbot County, there is a note, scratched in ink that has faded to brown, that speaks of a sickness, not of the body but of the soul. And if you read closely, it does not describe the slaves, it describes the master. The camera would pan across archival sketches of antebellum mansions, half-burned Bibles, portraits with eyes scratched out. Tonight, we exhume what was never meant to be spoken. A story of breeding, betrayal, and a wife forced into silence as horror became ritual. The land was called Ashwood, a sprawling 2,000-acre plantation set on the red clay of Georgia. From a distance, it was prosperity. Rows of cotton stretching to the horizon, white columns rising like teeth. But step closer and you would hear the silence. A silence broken only by chains, whispers, and screams muffled into the dirt. The owner, Isaac Warwick, had inherited the estate at the age of 30. His wife, Eleanor, was known in town for her beauty, her piety, and her failure to bear children. In the eyes of the church, her womb was barren, a silent curse. In Isaac's eyes, it was worse than sin, it was humiliation. Neighbors whispered of gatherings in the great house, doors locked, windows shuttered. Servants were never seen again after being called upstairs. The records show a sharp decline in births among the enslaved women during the years 1836 to 1838, an inexplicable collapse, one that even the county clerks noted with unease. The horror begins here. Not in blood spilled openly, but in the ritual humiliation of a woman who was forced to watch her husband remake creation in his own twisted image. It is rare for the voice of a plantation wife to survive. Yet in the attic of the Ashwood estate, discovered decades later when the roof finally collapsed, was a half-burned leather-bound book. Its pages, blackened at the edges, carried words that stank of despair. He brings them in at night, girls no older than 15, trembling like lambs. He makes me sit, always in the chair by the window, as if the moonlight were meant to baptize what I am forced to witness. I am not wife, nor woman, nor anything human anymore. I am a shadow bound to his spectacle. The writing grows frantic. Words cross over words. On one page, a smear of ink resembles a scream frozen in silence. Eleanor describes hearing the cries echo through the walls long after the acts had ended. She writes of Isaac's sermons. Yes, sermons, where he invoked scripture to justify what he called his covenant of blood and seed. Local lore speaks of women who went missing from nearby farms, never seen again. In Eleanor's journal there are names of the disappeared, and one line, scrawled with shaking hands. He says the children will not be born of me, but of the land itself, carried in wombs not mine. He says the house will be his true bride. Ashwood was not isolated. The nearest town, Hollow Creek, stood just 6 miles away. A church steeple rose above its dirt streets, bells ringing every Sunday, reminding the people of order, salvation, and hierarchy. They knew what happened at the Warwick estate. Everyone knew, yet no one spoke. The preacher, Reverend Colton, preached submission, quoting Ephesians, "Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands, as unto the Lord." From the pulpit, his gaze would linger on Eleanor, seated stiffly in the front pew. He never looked at her directly, but the congregation could see the shame trembling in her hands. When women vanished, Hollow Creek told itself they had run north or sold elsewhere. It was easier than admitting the truth. Easier than looking into the night and hearing the faint cries carried on the wind. Silence became complicity, and complicity in time hardened into ritual. The entire town, farmers, merchants, churchgoers, turned away, as though to speak aloud was to invite contamination. The architecture of Ashwood was peculiar. Built by Isaac's grandfather in the 1790s, its columns curved inward, as though bowing. The upper windows were narrow, cathedral-like, casting light not on the rooms but directly onto the central staircase. Local craftsmen swore the house was designed less like a dwelling and more like a chapel. Eleanor wrote of how Isaac began referring to the house as her. Not Eleanor, but Ashwood itself. "She receives what you cannot," he told her. "Her walls are womb enough." During nights of torment, Isaac would demand Eleanor to sit in the parlor while he carried his rituals upstairs. The groans of wood, the muffled cries of enslaved women, the rhythmic thud of boots against floorboards. Eleanor described it as the house itself breathing. In one chilling entry, she wrote, "The plaster sweats. The walls contract. When the crying stops, I hear something else. An infant's cry, though no child is ever brought forth. He whispers to the beams as though the house itself is alive, and I believe he means to wet it." The plantation house, a monument of Southern wealth, had become a bride made of timber and stone. A grotesque union of power, body, and land. In 1837, county records noted something strange. Despite Isaac's nightly rituals, despite pregnancies among the enslaved women, no infants were ever recorded as surviving at Ashwood. Midwives whispered of stillbirths, of children born malformed or silent, of bodies hurriedly buried in shallow graves beyond the cotton fields. Eleanor's journal hints at worse. "I heard one wail, sharp and true, carried from upstairs. Yet when I asked to see, Isaac forbade it. Hours later, I saw him carry a bundle out into the fields beneath the moon. He placed it in the earth, not with sorrow but with ceremony." Neighbors claimed the land around Ashwood grew thick with weeds. Soil turned black and damp as if it drank what it was not meant to drink. Livestock miscarried. Dogs howled at the house, refusing to cross its threshold. The truth was never spoken aloud, but the evidence lay in the fields, in the silence of cradles, in the uncanny way the Warwick estate seemed to consume life without ever giving it back. The children were not children, or perhaps they never were. One autumn evening in 1837, Reverend Colton visited Ashwood. His journal, preserved in church archives, records nothing of the visit. Only a single sentence: "The house is not of God." But Eleanor's journal tells more. She describes Colton standing in the parlor, staring at the staircase as though it were an altar. Isaac offered him brandy, spoke of covenant and lineage, of seeding a generation untainted by sterile flesh. Colton said nothing, yet he did not rebuke. He left quickly, pale, muttering only that scripture can be twisted as easily as a neck. Afterward, Isaac mocked him. "Even the shepherd fears the house," he told Eleanor. "But sheep never look away for long. They come back. They always come back." From that day forward, sermons in Hollow Creek grew harsher, more apocalyptic. Parishioners whispered of Eve's curse, of wombs corrupted, of the necessity of obedience to men who bore the burden of creation. The pulpit had become an extension of Ashwood. By the winter of 1837, Eleanor's entries take on a fevered, dreamlike quality. Her words bleed into each other, sentences breaking apart like shattered glass. She writes of shadows moving in the corners, of whispers in voices she cannot place. "The walls moan when I sleep, the floors throb like veins. At times I hear laughter, though it is not Isaac's, nor mine, nor any human's. It is the house. The house rejoices when he enters them, when he breaks them. It is I who cannot bear children. Yet I feel swollen, heavy, as though I too carry what the house desires." Her sense of self collapses. Some passages read as though she has fused with Ashwood, referring to herself as we. She begins scratching at her skin, convinced roots are growing beneath it, that her body is no longer hers but a vessel waiting to bloom. Neighbors noticed Eleanor's frailty. She stopped attending church. When asked, Isaac said she was ill, consumed by the curse of barrenness. Yet the truth was more terrible. She was being consumed, not by sickness, but by the house itself. In 1902, long after Ashwood had been abandoned, workers restoring the Hollow Creek orphanage discovered a locked chest in the basement. Inside were ash-stained baptismal robes, scraps of cloth marked with the Warwick crest, and bones, small bones, infant bones. No records explain how they arrived there. The church denied knowledge, though the orphanage had been operated by the very congregation once led by Reverend Colton. The bones were quietly reburied in unmarked graves, the chest burned, and silence restored. But a few fragments survived. Letters hidden in hymnals speak of deliveries from the Warwick estate, of infants who lived only hours before being taken away, baptized in secret, and never spoken of again. It suggested a truth Eleanor only glimpsed in madness, that Isaac's children were born, but not meant to live. Their brief existence was ritual, sacrifice, a dark covenant between plantation, church, and land. Even decades later, Hollow Creek carried the weight of something unspeakable. Families refused to discuss Ashwood. Children were warned never to walk near its ruins. The house had long since collapsed, yet its shadow remained, pressing on the town like a bruise that never healed. In early 1838, farmers in Hollow Creek reported their soil turning sour. Corn failed. Cotton wilted before harvest. Wells tasted of iron and ash. One farmer wrote in his ledger, "The ground is spoiled, as if fed on things unholy." Eleanor's journal confirms it. She describes Isaac burying not only infants, but entire bodies in the earth beyond the fields. She wrote of shapes sewn into sacks, lowered like offerings into shallow graves. When she begged him to stop, Isaac only said, "The land drinks, the land remembers. Soon it will return what it is owed." Neighbors avoided Ashwood's borders. Some claimed to see figures wandering at night, thin, bent, moving strangely, as though learning how to walk. Dogs wailed, chickens laid bloodied eggs, and the air carried a metallic stench that lingered even under the sun. The plantation was no longer farmland. It was a graveyard pretending to be a farm, and in silence it grew hungry. Eleanor's sanity teetered, yet within her fractured words lies resistance. One entry, dated March 1838, reads with sudden clarity, "I will not watch again. I will not be his witness. If he is wedded to the house, then I shall unmake the bride." She began gathering lamp oil, hiding matches beneath her mattress. She sketched crude maps of the house, noting which beams carried the weight, where the stairs would collapse if fire spread. But Ashwood was not so easily undone. Eleanor wrote of doors refusing to open, windows nailed shut without her hand, rooms shifting overnight as though the architecture itself conspired against her. On the final page before the ink trails off, she scrawled, "The house knows." Her defiance was swallowed in silence. No record tells whether she succeeded, only that soon after, the estate would stand empty. Court documents record that on May 3, 1838, Ashwood was found deserted. No slaves, no master, no mistress. Food sat rotting on tables. Beds were warm, sheets unmade, as if abandoned in haste. But the silence was not natural. Farmers claimed the night before was filled with sound. Low thunder without storm. A chorus of voices without words. Screams that carried across the fields and ended all at once. When authorities entered, they found Eleanor's journal in the parlor chair, half-burned, pages scattered like leaves. A scorch mark darkened the floor, though no fire had consumed the walls. Upstairs, the doors were locked from within, but when forced open, the rooms were empty. Empty except for one thing. In the nursery, though Eleanor had never borne a child, stood a cradle rocking gently, though no wind stirred. Inside was nothing but soil, damp and black, smelling of blood. From that night, Ashwood's legacy ended. The name Warwick vanished from local registries. The church ceased mentioning Hollow Creek in its records. The town itself dwindled, swallowed by neglect, until only ruins and stories remained. But the silence that consumed Ashwood was not an ending. It was a pause, a held breath, something waiting. In 1911, a traveling journalist named Harvey Quinn collected oral histories from the oldest residents of Talbot County. Among them was a woman named Dinah Clark, born enslaved at Ashwood in the 1830s, who had escaped as a child on the night the plantation emptied. Her testimony, never published in her lifetime, surfaced decades later in the Library of Congress archives. Her words were simple but chilling. "We did not leave. We were taken out. The land lifted us, pulled us, dragged us into the trees. I heard the women crying, but the ground took the sound. Mr. Isaac, he walked into the soil like it was water, and we never saw him again. Dinah's words were dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman scarred by trauma. But she spoke with conviction, repeating one line until her voice broke. The house was his wife, but the earth was his grave. For decades, her story lay buried in transcripts, unacknowledged. Only later would researchers realize she was the last living voice of Ashwood. In 1924, renovations at a theological seminary in Savannah uncovered sealed crates hidden in the basement. Inside were books wrapped in burlap, charred at the edges. One bore the initials IW carved into the cover. Contained handwritten sermons in Isaac Warwick's hand. Dozens of them. The sermons twisted scripture into something darker. The seed of man is the true baptism. Wives are but witnesses. The covenant lies in the land. Children born still are not dead, but planted. The final sermon is the most disturbing. It reads, "When the womb of woman fails, the earth itself shall conceive. From the blood of the enslaved, from the bones of the child, the true bride will awaken. The house shall rise, not as wood and stone, but as flesh." The seminary quietly suppressed the discovery. The crates vanished into private archives, labeled heretical. Yet whispers persisted among students, of strange stains in the basement floorboards, and of nights when chanting seemed to seep from the walls. During the 1930s, the Federal Writers Project collected thousands of narratives from formerly enslaved people. One fragment, and signed, tells of a boy who had lived near Ashwood. He claimed to see the missus standing in the fields after the plantation emptied, pale, hollow-eyed, her dress soaked as though with rain though the sky was clear. The boy wrote, "She didn't walk, she floated. Her hands were black with dirt. She pointed at the ground, and the dirt moved like water." The interviewer annotated the page, "Vision of ghost, delirium?" But the description matches other local accounts of a woman in white, haunting the ruins for decades. Some said she was Eleanor, forever bound to the land she could not burn. Others claimed she was the land itself, Ashwood's true bride, still waiting. By the 1930s, Hollow Creek was nearly gone. Only the church remained, doors locked, windows boarded. Locals warned outsiders to stay clear. They said the ground was cursed, that crops failed within miles of the ruins, that even birds refused to nest there. Yet the stories endured. Not just of Isaac, not just of Eleanor, but of something larger, older, born from the union of cruelty and soil, something that had not yet finished its work. In the spring of 1941, before the war pulled every young man from Talbot County, a group of university archaeologists surveyed the land where Ashwood once stood. Their goal was simple: map the ruins, recover artifacts, write a quiet paper no one would read. But their notes, later seized, some burned, hint at something darker. Beneath the foundation, they found a pit lined with brick, filled with soil unlike any other in Georgia. Thick, black, slick as oil. Bones were tangled within, infant bones, adult bones, animal bones, layered as if intentionally arranged. One assistant recorded, "The bones hum, not in sound but in feeling. My hands shake when I touch them." The lead archaeologist demanded the pit be sealed, claiming disease. Locals believed otherwise. For weeks afterward, farmers reported their cattle gone missing, dragged toward the Ashwood ruins. Their bodies never recovered. The university ended the dig abruptly, files disappearing into government storage. The official record says nothing was found. But a survivor of the dig, interviewed in 1963, whispered, "The house was not gone. It was only waiting for us to unearth it." During World War II, Talbot County contributed little cotton. Reports from agricultural officers described the soil as sterile, acidic, unfit for crops. Yet it wasn't sterility, it was transformation. Families who tilled the land near Hollow Creek claimed the soil bled when struck by the plow. Children returned home with hands stained black that no washing could erase. One farmer's diary notes, The earth feels soft, like flesh. The mule won't step near it. My wife says she hears cries under the ground when the wind blows. Samples sent to laboratories in Atlanta were lost in transit. A second shipment arrived, but the analysis returned inconclusive. The soil contained an unidentified compound, neither mineral nor organic, that reacted to heat by releasing a foul stench and smoke resembling breath. The government declared the land unusable, buying parcels under the Agricultural Adjustment Act. But locals believed this was no accident. They whispered that federal agents were not containing the soil, but studying it. In 1949, the final preacher of Hollow Creek's abandoned church was found hanging from the bell tower. His body dangled for days before anyone dared to cut it down. In his pockets were torn pages of Warwick sermons, annotated with frantic scrawl. It was never his seed. It was never his house. He only unlocked the door. Neighbors swore they had seen lights flickering in the church the week before. Blue, pulsing, alive. Children spoke of a sound like a heartbeat echoing from the steeple. After his death, the church was demolished brick by brick. Yet within weeks, strange growth overtook the lot. Vines black as coal, blooming with pale flowers that withered by dusk. No one returned. The town dissolved. By 1950, Hollow Creek was erased from maps, its roads overgrown, its name spoken only in whispers. Ashwood, though collapsed, lived on in rumor, archive, and the black soil that no plow could tame. And so the story lingered, half history, half nightmare. But one question remained. Had Ashwood truly been abandoned? Or was it still waiting, buried in the red clay of Georgia, patient as the grave? In 1952, a reel of film surfaced in the archives of the Georgia Historical Society, mislabeled as Agricultural Survey. It was silent, grainy, black and white. What it showed was not agriculture, it was Ashwood. Frames reveal men in suits and hats digging at the site. Their shovels strike something solid. Beams of rotted wood, a staircase descending underground. The camera lingers on the men as they pull something out. Not wood, not stone. Something that bends. Something that drips. The footage ends abruptly when the camera falls sideways. For several seconds, the film shows only the earth shaking before cutting to black. No record explains who shot the film. Shortly after its discovery, the reel disappeared into federal custody. Only a few still frames survive, blurred yet unmistakable. A cradle, half buried in dirt, rocking on its own. Those who saw the reel claimed to hear sound despite its silence. A low hum, pulsing like a heartbeat. Some said they could hear a woman's voice, faint, begging, "Do not watch. Ashwood's ruins are gone now. Bulldozed, erased. But ask the elders of Talbot County, and they will tell you the land remains empty. No house ever built there stands for long. Walls sweat, foundations crack, and roofs sag as if pressed down by unseen hands. What remains is a legend, but legends, like seeds, are not dead. They wait, they grow. The story of Isaac Warwick was never about a man, nor his wife, nor even the enslaved souls he desecrated. It was about the land itself, land soaked in blood, forced to birth what should never be born. Ashwood was not a house. It was a womb, and it was fed. Eleanor's final words, "The house knows," linger like a curse. Perhaps she tried to burn it. Perhaps she begged the land to release her. But the truth is not destruction. The truth is continuation. Because even now, farmers in Georgia speak of soil that bleeds, of nights when the air tastes metallic, of laughter carried on the wind when no one is there. They speak of a woman in white drifting across the fields, pointing at the ground as though commanding it to rise. And if you listen closely, when the fields are still, you may hear it, the heartbeat of a house that was never meant to live. Ashwood waits.